This week's podcast from the tragic Tapesty by A.T. Barncourt is Chapter 5, From Enemy to Ally. Commander Reese Montgomery's space cruiser was on a routine observation run of the outlying Insharian outpost. The Insharians and Trevians were not currently at war, but with a long history of conflicts, it was prudent to keep an eye on activities in the border regions. Because his ship was closer to enemy communication stations and home stations, Captain Montgomery and his crew heard about the Cygtan attacks on the Anshur and Jaspin border worlds before they heard of the attacks on their own border worlds, which were followed closely by the reports of the attacks on the Thix world. Obviously, the first order of business was to go back and protect Trevan territory. After having navigation set that course, he told his surveillance crew to check their records for anything unusual. By all rights, they should have seen something. A Cygtan battleship should have left some trace. No one had a cloaking device that good. The TSS Sequoia returned to normal space just inside the Insharian border. Montgomery wanted to check for possible Cygtan relay stations. Scans showed nothing. How are they planning to communicate each other, he asked, more than himself than anyone else. Kaler, see what signals we can intercept. Yes, sir. Montgomery sent a priority message to headquarters, requesting further orders. Kaler hailed him on the intercom about 30 minutes later. Sir, I think I know how they're planning to communicate with each other, he said. They're commandeering the comm stations of the worlds they're conquering. We just intercepted a distress call from the terraforming research station on Malfina IV. After they ate the operator, they began using his equipment to send a signal back to the Cygtan headquarters. Montgomery noticed that Kaler's face was a little more ashen than normal. Do you think there are any humans still alive on Malfina IV? Kaler? I don't know, sir, but the insurance said that they had their families there. Their children. I think we should see if we can rescue them, sir. I suspect that they are all already dead, he said. However, we should at least destroy the Cygtan relay point there. Maybe we'll get lucky and find some survivors. Yes, sir. Montgomery gave his orders to the helmsman and sent another message to headquarters, informing them on their intent to take out the Cygtan relay point on Malfina IV. Cloaked, they put themselves in an interception path with the Cygtan ship. Their combat computer was analyzing the enemy frequency. Their combat computer was analyzing the enemy frigate for any weaknesses they could exploit. By their reckoning, it was an older ship, which was probably why it went for an outpost instead of a main population center. Still, it took almost all of their photon ammunition to take it down, and they were nearly hit by a plasma blast. They blasted a communication tower from orbit. Landing an away team was a bit more problematic. They finally found a terraforming observation post far enough from the main invasion site to let them land without being swarmed by hungry Cygtans. There was only one lab technician there, Averna Miller. Though she was in shock, she had enough presence of mind to tell them, in the sharp accent of typical of an Insharian, where some surface vehicles were, and to give him her tablet with the layout of the main complex on it. The Sequoia's chief medic gave her a mood stabilizer and sat her down to ask her some more questions. Montgomery looked around at the small trees and primitive grasses and asked, "How far are you in the terraforming of this world?" "We have the climate stable enough for the initial vegetation," she said. "Have you dismantled the temperature regulators yet?" "No, but you can't operate them from here. The controls are in the main complex." She moved the layout with her finger on the tablet and then tapped it once to change floors. "There! That's where the control room is. If you're going to chill them out, you're going to need me to operate the systems, though." Montgomery nodded. "How long before it's nights?" "About 2 more hours," she answered. "What type of supplies do you have here?" Instead of answering, Verna walked to a shed and opened it. "If you can use it to get rid of those monsters, you can take it." Bennett, Montgomery ordered, see if we can use what we can use in there. Aye, sir. Outside of the power pack and emergency medical supplies, there wasn't much of military value in the shed. They took Verna's vehicle to a garage closer to the main complex that had 3 vehicles in it. Inside, 2 of the mechanics were planning to defend themselves. Verna was able to convince them to cooperate. The older one muttered, Never thought I would see the day when I would work with a Trevin, much less a Trevin military unit. But those bugs, they are the devil's spawn. We humans got to stick together if we don't want to be eaten. My feelings exactly, Montgomery said. So, how would you enter the main complex if you were us? If I were you, I'd wait for nightfall and drive very fast, guns blazing, the older mechanic said. But if it was me, I would try the underground access tunnel first. I thought those were sealed, Verna said, following the mechanic as he and his younger co-worker grabbed a few tools and walked to the back of the vehicle repair bay. They were, but that doesn't mean they can't be opened with the right tools, the older mechanic said, fitting the wrench on the door while the other mechanic positioned the crowbar. And this is the place to get the tools. You might want to grab some air masks from the cabinet behind you, Verna. This air is going to be stale. Verna handed Montgomery several masks, keeping one for herself. He offered one to the older mechanic, who refused, saying he wasn't up to fighting bugs. The younger mechanic took the one offered him, grabbed the flashlight, and took the wrench from the first mechanic's hands. You're going to need help opening the other side, he said. His crew had their own masks, but he motioned to them to clip the extra one to their belts. Maybe they would have no need of them, but it wouldn't hurt to have extras. They climbed into the dark tunnel behind the younger mechanic. It was obvious that all the power had been shut off to it. It would still be night when they got there, but they wouldn't be detected. The tunnel opened into the warehouse section of the complex. Several of the metal crates had been opened and rifled through, with empty foodstuff containers strewn about. There was a pile of bones and torn cloth, which was probably a human not so long ago. Montgomery and his men pulled out their firearms. Why aren't they still down here? One of his men asked. Probably because they realized there was easier and fresher food to be had elsewhere, he answered, which means they'll probably be back later. There's a distribution control hub over there, the young mechanic said. We can see where they are and use the delivery robots as scouts. The Cygtan guarding the control hub was too busy tearing through a container of vegetable flakes to hear their approach. Montgomery and 2 of his men were able to shoot it before it could alert anyone. Going to the council, the mechanic first turned the surveillance system to motion detector mode. It looks like they're still eating people in the labs, he said. They also have the comm center guarded. What about the atmosphere control center, Verna asked. The mechanic keyed in the location. Don't see anyone alive in there, but you might need to use the maintenance tunnels to get there. He took a deep breath and cracked his knuckles. Now to see how much I remember of Sam's system. I can't program schedules into it, but I usually do direct control runs to make sure the repairs I do to the robots work. Let's find one nearby. The robots zipped through the tunnel, showing one Cygtan guard post along the route, but everything else was clear. Montgomery sent 4 of his people with Verna, then turned to his mechanic and asked, Can you access the building's thermostat from here? I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know how to do it, the mechanic said. Kaler, do you think you can figure it out? The comm officer looked over the council and nodded. The mechanic gave up his seat to him. Are we planning to freeze them out? The mechanic asked. Being warm-blooded may be our only real advantage against them right now, Montgomery said. At least, we might be able to get them away from the comm center. While Kaler hacked his way into the temperature controls, Montgomery and the mechanic watched the video screens. One of the motion detectors flashed over to a scene of a child's head peeking out over a tunnel over a smashed robot. An older female child pulled him back. Where is this location? Montgomery asked the mechanic. It's on a lower level than we are now. I can program a robot to lead us there. Kaler stopped his activity. What is it? He asked. There are children hiding in the tunnels, Montgomery said. Kaler immediately turned the council back over to the mechanic, who programmed a robot with the coordinates and orders to wait for him before going there. Leaving Marks, the only other member of the way team, behind to guard Kaler while he worked, Montgomery accompanied the mechanic himself. The robot was waiting for them outside the room. Firearm drawn, Montgomery covered the mechanic as they followed the robot through the access tunnels, down to the shaft where the broken robot laid. The mechanic called out a few names. The boy and older girl came out, followed by 5 other children. They looked at Montgomery with terror in their eyes. It's okay, the mechanic told them. This is Commander Montgomery. He's here to help save us from the bugs. Hello, children, Montgomery said. We're going to make it really cold here soon, to make the bugs go to sleep. So, we need to get you someplace warm, okay? They nodded and followed the mechanic back to the main floor of the warehouse. Too late, Montgomery realized they hadn't covered over the pile of bones there. He quickly hurried the children past it into the control room. Then he tipped an empty crate over the pile. There was still blood all over the floor. He went back to the room. How many air masks do we have? He asked. A quick survey showed 8. 2 for each Trevin still in the room, and 1 for the mechanic and the 1 Verna left behind. Montgomery had them placed on the children and had the mechanic take them back through the access tunnel to the older mechanic. As the children left the room, the oldest girl said, They aren't bugs, you know. They're Cygtans. I know, Shannon, the mechanic said, but we can talk about that back at the garage with Ray. It was only a few minutes after the children left that the building became noticeably colder. Montgomery watched on the video screens as Cygtans instinctively moved to warmer areas. He relaxed his shoulders a little as his men and Verna made it to the climate control center. Kaler connected a direct comm link to the garage. He informed the older mechanic of the children coming to him. Then he and Marks brought in some unspoiled food and sealed the door, while Montgomery monitored the Cygtans. Unfortunately, the aliens hadn't completely lost their problem-solving skills. They were finding ways to keep themselves warm without setting off the fire suppression system. Montgomery paused for a moment, and then signaled Bennett. Can Miss Miller trigger the fire suppression system from where you're at? He asked. He watched Verna's face on the screen as Bennett repeated the request. It was almost an evil sense of delight in it as she began typing commands into the terminal. Bennett signaled back. Your area is sealed, isn't it? Yes, it is. On multiple screens, curtains of white foam gushed from the ceilings. Montgomery smiled inside of himself. She was treating it as if it was an oil fire. The Cygtans began to evacuate the building to get away from the phone, except for those guarding the communication center. The tower's out and the ship's dead, Kaler said. They must be trying to reroute its signal somewhere. Marks finally exploded at disgust. Why don't we just blow up the room? We can use a robot to place the target beacon and let the Sequoia do the rest. Kaler tried his hand with the robot system. It didn't respond to him quite as quickly as it did for the mechanic, but he was able to get a robot to the room and then get it to take a beacon to the access tunnel near the communication center. Montgomery gave the Sequoia's chief gunner the order to blast the area. Minutes later, the screen showing the communication room went blank. Satisfied, Montgomery ordered a retreat to the garage. Even though 4 of their crew members would be coming back, even though the 4 crew members coming back would give them all enough face masks to go through the tunnel, he had Kaler locate a crate of them through the warehouse database. It required a hack into another delivery center system, but they managed it. As they traveled back through the access tunnel, Montgomery questioned Verna on where the other survivors may be. Back in the garage, he organized the rescue of the humans in the outlying survey post and sent the children and Verna up with the first shuttle. By the time the last shuttle left, frost was forming on the trees. They could only pray that they weren't leaving any live humans behind. Back on the Sequoia, Montgomery sent his report to his superiors. They sent back their congratulations with orders to return to the nearest Trevin spaceport to refuel, debrief, and unload the refugees. It would be a few days of travel. Hopefully they would be able to keep the children distracted from remembering too much of what they saw.